there everyone, this is Kai. So I've taken some time to pause some of the things that I've been building for us all in Northern California and all of the madness going on with that, though we are very much looking forward to seeing you in the middle of October, on October 15th through 17th at Camp Harmon in Northern California, of course. But what I'm here for you today is to cover some rules on fizz reps and supply bags. I know that some of the rules and interpretations of those rules have floated around for a little bit, and there's been quite a bit of a difference of opinion in the overall network's opinion of how certain things should go. So I want to set the record straight and keep us all on the same kind of target moving forward. So the first thing I've done is I've collected all mention of supply bags and things like that from the rulebook, so I can recite some of that, and we've used some of that to really isolate the spirit of the rules and the intent of them, and that is what we've used to determine how best to rule all of the various supply bag and other skills connected to them, including how we handle fizz reps. So, to get started, firstly, we have, obviously, you need a supply bag. Your supply bag is required to have the word supply bag written clearly on it and displayed in some kind of way. Fairly straightforward so far. It also needs to be able to close. How that closes is entirely up to you. It can be a strap, it can be a flap, buttons, all that kind of stuff. Zippers are fine. The more you make it genre, the better, but I'm not going to be litigious on it. So, what is the purpose of the supply bag? The purpose of the supply bag is basically your character's inventory. And if you don't have a supply bag on you, then you technically don't have an inventory to store anything in. Meaning that everything that you have on you must be fizz rep. Now, for armor or weapons or things like that, that's relatively easy. But when it starts to come to certain crafted objects, brews and injectables and all those types of things, as well as every kind of crafting resource, you are going to need to fizz rep those, unless you have a supply bag, in which case things go in the supply bag, and it's kind of like the equivalent of a D&D magic bag of holding. So that's kind of the idea on it. Now, your supply bag needs to be big enough to hold a certain type of things. What it needs to do is, firstly, it needs to be big enough to hold 6 of these. These are 12-ounce bottles. You can use bigger bottles if you prefer, but they cannot be smaller than 12 ounces. Fairly straightforward. These weren't too hard for me to pick up. I found them online on most kind of stores. You can team up with someone else and get them for about, like a pack of 12 of them for about $1 each. And if you'd like to genre them up, as you can see, these ones kind of look like messed up frosted glass. That is because I used a sanding sponge on a normal shiny bottle like this. And that's all you need to do. Now, you might notice that this one has one of those child-safe caps. Little known fact with those is that every one of those child-safe caps has a normal bottle cap underneath. So if you hate those things, you can actually kind of make a little slice or get some pliers and pop those right off. So that's something that you can do. Now, I said that we need to have 6 of these, so I'm going to pull all of these 6 out. You also need to have enough room to hold 6 of these as well. These are just 10 milliliter injectable fizz reps. If you want, you can do the same thing with the sanding sponge to mess these up a little bit. I have seen some really cool props if you get a little tiny jar from Home Depot for some amber shellac and just painting a little bit on these and leaving them to dry overnight, and they will be this weird kind of like dirty, gross looking amber style, and again, very genre. totally up to you, but that is a nice, easy way of doing that. You can, if you like, use bigger injectable fizz wraps. That is fine, but it needs to be at least 10 milliliters. I've seen some people using really, really tiny thin ones. Those are cool, but they aren't legal for using these. So they're more aesthetic, and if you're actually going to be using something like this on someone in-game, then you need to have at least one this big in your hands, and you're pretending to inject them, or they are injecting themselves. And that is required. Now, I know that some people have had pretty valid concerns about the overall weight of your supply bag when you've stuffed all of these things into it. I understand that, and while your supply bag has to be big enough to hold all of those objects, you don't have to keep all of those objects in it at all times. I think it is good to have 1 or 2 injectables and 1 or 2 of these bottles in your bag, but having all 6, that doesn't seem really necessary to me, and we're not going to be enforcing that. The important thing is that it can close. Now, if you don't have 6 fizz wrap bottles, we have a couple of these big, super sophisticated and high-tech EVA foam blocks of a few different kind of shapes and configurations. All you have to do is get one of these into your bag. Now, with that in mind, I have seen some ideas that people have had of the bags that kind of fold in on themselves and scrunch up into a little small shape, and then you just button them closed. I've also seen some that people want their supply bag to be fizz wrapped by multiple pouches all over something. That is not going to work. You need to have at least one compartment on your supply bag that everything can fit in. It's totally okay if it has other little pouches and bags on the side and stuff, and by all means, you can use those. But the inside of this needs to be big enough to hold, as I said, those foam blocks or your bottle fizz wraps. Now, the other thing with that is I've seen collapsible bottles. Those are great, but your bag needs to hold essentially as if they were full. So you're going to need to make sure that you can fill them and then put them in your bag, and they will fit and the bag will close. Otherwise, it's not legal and your bag is not big enough. I know that that might disappoint a few people, but there is a very good series of reasons for that. And this is where I'm going to go over some of the other things that have been covered with the supply bag rules. So bear with me on this. One of the main important things is that your supply bag should be on the outside of your costume. If I was going around and I had this like tucked under here, that's not acceptable. It has to be on the outside layer of your clothing. Really good if you've got kind of shoulder baggy type things or something hanging off your hip and so forth. If you have, good big compartments on something, that can be okay, but you need to be prepared for the idea that it should be on the most outside area of your costume. And the reason for that is because there is a skill in the game called pickpocket. Now, while we in NorCal are going to have some particular philosophies behind when theft is and isn't acceptable at our game, and that might be a little bit of a deviation from how other chapters handle it, and we will cover that soon, I do promise. I don't want to bog this video up too much with it, but when it comes to it, this is the target that people are going to try and do to get, steal from you, and that doesn't necessarily have to be PCs. PCs can target NPCs, and you don't need consent there. Likewise, NPCs can target you, and they can steal from you, and they will try, which is why you need a supply bag, and you need it clearly labeled and so they know where to do it. The philosophy behind this is, one, because it has to be a minimum size, they are all a reasonable target that can be picked out. And they're labeled, so people know it's there. And the other thing is that when people start trying to put little pegs on the little clippy pegs to represent that you've been pickpocketed, other parts of the body are legal targets to a degree, but the main idea behind the supply bag is if you don't know the person and you don't want to invade their space, getting close enough to clip something on their supply bag that might be hanging on their shoulder or something like that is much less invasive than, you know, trying to get in and get onto like this pocket here or something like that. And that's a lot more respectful of someone's space. If they're a friend, or you know them a bit more comfortably, or you've communicated with them like ahead of time on what their physical boundaries are and things like that, that's great, you know. But if you don't know, this is the best thing to target. It's nice and safe, and it's out there, and it's visible. And that's why it needs to always be a minimum size. So if you have one of those super collapsible bags, I'm sorry, but they're not going to be good enough unless you have them open and hanging open like that at all times. I wouldn't recommend that, but that is one of the core philosophies why the bags have to be like that. So we have some more info for you as well, and a couple of kind of fizz up things. I realize that we're already getting pretty heavy on time length here. I will be uploading this to YouTube and making sure that you all are able to watch it through on a proper distance. But yeah, so the next notes on it. Anything on an item card that you plan to use or sell as your character must be fizz repped. The fizz rep doesn't have to be sold. So if I am selling you this, great. I can get my item card and put it together. I'm going to hand you this. Now, everyone else around, they're going to see me handing you this and you handing me some money, maybe. And from a distance, everyone knows what's going on. At its core, Dystopia Rising always strives to be a WYSIWYG game, and WYSIWYG stands for what you see is what you get. So whenever possible, being able to fizz rep things is far more interesting, engaging, and real. And then, as if you've ever been to my chapter, you'll know that I try to make things really have a bit more realism. And one of the overall goals of 3.0 is the idea of, instead of people kind of looking over cards and having a look at things, and, you know, you just see a couple of people hunched over some cards, looking at that in the distance, you don't know what they're trading, you don't know what they're dealing with, but they've got a gun on them, or maybe they have some bushels of herbs. These are some of the things that we're going to have in our NPC department. Or maybe they clearly have some pieces of scrap that they're doing. Now, if that's going on, then these cards are contained within this big handful. And the NPC might be, or another player maybe, giving you some of these to look at. And now they're handing you a card and the fizz rep. And so you're holding the fizz rep while you're looking at the individual cards. And from a distance, it's way more realistic. So we're going to be trying to make sure that our merchants and vendors that come into game, they're going to be, you know, selling things just as they normally would, but they're going to be using some more fizz reps to help that be more visible. Now, if you're going to be selling things, then I might encourage you, it doesn't have to be as detailed as this, but there are definitely places like Michael's and things like that that have coupons and sales all year round, and usually last season's plastic plants are 50% off all the time. I made all of these with maybe about 15 bucks. So if you wanted to grab a fake plant, as a nice little fizz rep to stuff into your bag, that's really handy. Likewise, if you make some kind of generic pieces of metal or scrap, most of the ones for our chapter are on NPC side are probably going to be made of EVA foam because they're durable and things like that. But you can use whatever you like as long as they're not sharp or dangerous or anything like that. You can even use some pieces of license plate and stuff. When you're selling something to another character, NPC or player, while you will hand them the fizz rep as well as the item card to give it to them, what they're going to do is they're going to take their supply bag and they're going to open their supply bag up and they're going to put these in, and then they take just the fizz rep out. And if you're not selling them the fizz rep as well, you give them the fizz rep back. And you've got your card in here. Now, this card, this gun or potion or something like that, you can't use it unless you have a fizz rep for it. If you have a backup kind of Nerf blaster or something like that, that's great. That's really handy. We're not going to be incredibly litigious about what you use to fizz rep things. If it's a melee weapon, then having some sort of melee weapon to indicate is good. If you're selling a gun, it doesn't have to be some giant rifle. It can still be something like this. If you would like to go that extra mile, by all means, I will always support you if you decide to do more than the minimum. But the minimum is set up for a reason. So, you as a player, if you're selling something to another player, not an NPC, you can choose to give them the fizz rep. That's entirely up to you. Some people charge a little bit extra in-game currency to include the fizz rep. Not a bad idea if you need another bottle. But with the overall rules and mechanics of the game, some people have asked me the idea of, well, what if I don't have a supply bag? You can choose to walk around without a supply bag. That's fine. The problem with that, though, does mean that if you pick up some herbs, unless you've got something like this, you can't hold them. You literally have to drop them because you don't have the fizz rep for them. Likewise, if someone hands you an injectable card or a brew or something like that, if you don't have a supply bag to hide it from view, like the bag of holding kind of philosophy, then you're not legally allowed to carry it. Likewise, if you're a crafter, I highly recommend having a supply bag on you, because when you go off to the post office and turn in all of your crafting materials and they write their item cards, your item card for you, they can't give it to you unless you have a supply bag to immediately put it into. Or you have a fizz rep for something that you've made, and they can consider that the fizz rep for it. You can't use the same fizz rep for multiple things at the same time. However, if you have, say, maybe 3 potions or something like that, 3 brews as cards in here, but you've only got 1 bottle fizz rep, that's fine. That is absolutely fine, because you put it in the bag. Now, when you reach in and you pull it out, it's going to be the one that you want. Open it up, you drink it, or you hand it to a buddy to drink. And then when they're done with it, remember that brews now have a drinking time to them. You close it up, and you go, oh, let me just get you another drink. You put your hands back into the bag. You're pulling out a different bottle. You're not, you're pulling out the same fizz rep, but it's a different bottle now. It's a different brew, and you hand that to someone, or yourself. That's why I like the idea of having a couple of backups in your pocket, or specifically in here, because that means that you can, if you need to heal a friend, and you have a couple of those healing potions in your inventory, grab out a bottle, toss it to them. If they're in bleed out or something like that, they might be able to drink it. Well, so long as it follows the rules, chances are you'd still need to do that. But if it was an injectable, for example, and you able to toss an injectable FizzRep at them, they'll be able to inject it. They don't need to hold the card for that. If they're going to hold it for a little bit longer, then yeah, they're going to need the card. But in those kinds of climactic sort of emergencies and things like that, that's when these FizzReps are really useful. And they're all more exciting and cinematic because of that. And that's the whole idea. So hopefully that is illuminating on kind of some of the intent. So yeah, I'm going to go over the rest of the list. We're about done here. But yeah, so as I said, anything on an item card that you plan to use or sell as your character must be FizzRepped. The FizzRep does not have to be sold with the card. Just passing the FizzRep to the other person's supply bag is sufficient, and they hand it back to you. PCs can only be issued cards if the player has either an appropriate FizzRep or a supply bag to store it out of view. This includes collecting crafted items from the post office, as I said. Supply bag is the legal intended target for mugging and pickpocket skills and should be placed upon your person in a way as not to invade your personal boundaries if someone is attempting to mark it with a pickpocket peg. And that's basically what I said earlier, but I'm reading it out verbatim from the rulebook. Supply bags cannot be hidden under layers of clothing. Items stored inside the supply bag cannot be the target of a use of the break skill. It's very important because if someone has a potion bottle, and remember the brews take time to drink now. If you're drinking this, you can't just knock one back and then you're good to fight. It takes 60 seconds to drink a brew. So, you're chugging this brew and drinking, taking a pause, catching your breath, chugging it again, and some raider runs up on you and yells, "Break!" slaps you in the arm. They've just broken either your arm or they've broken the bottle, and they will specify. They'll either be break item, or break bottle, break brew, something like that, or they'll be break arm. If it's break arm, you're dropping the bottle. If it's break bottle, the item is destroyed. So be mindful of that, and if a raider or something comes running at you while you have that really, really important injectable that you're trying to get to your buddy, don't let them hit you, because it is a legal target. So, but the idea is very much that they aim for the arm holding it, not necessarily the actual FizzRep. Especially if you're in the middle of having this thing to your lips, and they go forward on you, and even if they just tap your torso and go break brew, they're doing that for the safety of not knocking this into your lips. So bear that in mind and play fair with it. I know you will. Alright, we have very few little bits left. Two other things. You can only have one bag that counts as your supply bag on you, on your person, at any one time. If you mug someone, you don't run off with their supply bag. You have a marshal, or a guide, as it were, a field guide or someone similar, will be the one to kind of crouch down after you've role-played. If they go into bleed out or something like that and you mug them, they will be the one that goes into the person's supply bag. And remember that all of your item cards, apart from FizzReps that you actually have upon your person. So, your armor, a weapon, a brew bottle that you've got stuffed in this pocket here that's just hanging out of it. This thing isn't big enough for me, but you get the idea. If I've got a FizzRep on me and it's stuck just here visible, then I can have the actual item card in my pocket or something like that, because this is not in my supply bag. It's not in my inventory. I'm more sort of equipped with it. And that's the idea behind that. But you're only allowed to have one supply bag on you at a time. If you've got two things that say supply bag on it, you gotta put one of them away because it's not legal. If you are using the disguise skill, perish the thought of you hiding your identity for some nefarious purposes, but should you choose to do something like that, you dastardly villain, you need a supply bag. And if you use your character's supply bag. People can recognize that. So you might want to have a nice secondary generic supply bag. That's up to you if you're the sneaky type. But if you plan to benefit from a supply bag, even while you're disguised, you need to have a disguised supply bag that looks like a supply bag. You need to follow that rule too. So if you've got a super sophisticated sneaky disguise that you look ultra cool in, it also needs an ultra cool supply bag to go with it. I think that is about it. I'm really looking forward to our settings team and I putting together a bunch of these kinds of generic sort of scrap and herbs and all those types of things. We're going to try and fizz wrap really as much as possible, but we're always going to try and use common sense, and so should you. If you're selling an airship, you don't need to make an airship. You can just have some keys on the keyring or something like that. That would be a great fizz wrap for selling a vehicle or something. If you're selling an engine block, I'm not going to expect you to do something like that. We're going to try our best. If it's not practical to make a fizz wrap for it, I understand, and I trust you to make that decision. But there's a lot of things that are handheld kind of sizes, and especially if you're planning on selling them, then you're going to need to have some sort of generic sort of fizz wrap for things. Something that I plan to do is, for the scrap that we're going to do, this was kind of a prototype. I'm going to try and have our generic scrap look like a whole bunch of different things. Some wires, some metal plates, maybe a weird like bit of ore that's been dug out of the ground, or a psionic crystal or something. And it's all of those things at once, which means that if I'm selling something like that, one of those things to someone, and they say, oh, I want to buy a psionic crystal. You go, okay. You reach into your bag, you pull out your generic scrap thing, if you don't have a fizz wrap for it, and it looks like it could believably be any kind of scrap, which means that you can sell it as any kind of scrap, and then they give you the fizz wrap back. So yeah, I hope you have fun with it. We are absolutely going to be putting that sort of effort in on our end, because it wouldn't be fair to expect you to do one thing and us not to, as always. And I am so excited to see as many of you as possible. We're going to be following all of the proper COVID concerns and everything like that. But I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as I can on our Season 3 opener, which is going to be on October 15th through 17th at Camp Harmon. If you need the address for that, it's on our official Dystopia Rising page. We will also be soon updating the website to have all of that information too. And keep your eyes peeled on that Dystopia Rising Facebook page to see things going on. And another good place to keep your eyes peeled is the Dystopia Rising community Facebook group as well, for Northern California specifically, as those are good places to catch us. And I look forward to seeing you all in the way.